When you think of the Middle Ages, what comes to mind? Knights, castles, and maybe people with terrible teeth. We see it in movies all the time. The peasant with a few brown stumps, the grinning rogue with a mouthful of gaps. It's a powerful image. It makes us feel good about our modern world of dentists and fluoride toothpaste. But is it true? Did medieval people just let their teeth rot away? The answer is no. They absolutely cared about their teeth, they just cared about them in a different way. Their understanding of health was completely different from ours. They didn't know about germs or bacteria. They didn't have microscopes to see the plaque building up on their enamel. Their world was one of humors, spirits, and the balance of nature. So their approach to dental care was based on what they could see, smell, and feel. The two biggest concerns were pain and bad breath. A toothache was a serious problem in a world without modern painkillers. It could be debilitating. People would do almost anything to avoid it or stop it. And bad breath, or foul breath, as they called it, was a major social issue. It was considered a sign of poor health, low status, or even moral corruption. In a close-quarters society, how your breath smelled mattered. People wanted to be able to speak to their lord, their priest, or a potential spouse without causing offense. So the goal of medieval dental hygiene wasn't to prevent cavities in the way we think of it. It was to keep the teeth white, the gums strong, and the breath sweet. Whiteness was a sign of beauty and refinement. It showed you took care of yourself. They had a variety of methods to achieve this, from simple rubbing cloths to complex herbal mixtures. These practices weren't just for the rich either. People of all classes had their own versions of oral care, using whatever materials they had available. Of course, their methods were limited. They couldn't fix a deep cavity or perform a root canal. Dental problems were common and often led to tooth loss. But the idea that they were completely ignorant or apathetic is wrong. They were actively trying to manage their oral health using the knowledge and tools they possessed. Skeletal remains from the period tell a complicated story. Many people did have worn teeth, abscesses, and missing teeth. But many others had surprisingly healthy teeth, often with fewer cavities than you might expect. This was largely due to their diet, which was low in one key ingredient, sugar. We'll get to that later. For now, the important thing to understand is that medieval people were not passive victims of dental decay. They were active participants in their own health. They had routines, recipes, and remedies. They worried about their smiles and the smell of their breath just like we do. Their world was different, but their desire for a clean mouth was surprisingly familiar. The story of medieval dental care isn't a story of neglect, it's a story of ingenuity, tradition, and a constant battle against pain and social stigma. So if they cared about their teeth, what did they actually do? Their bathroom cabinets weren't filled with plastic tubes and electric brushes. Their tools were simpler, drawn from the world around them. The most common tool for cleaning teeth was a piece of cloth. A small square of linen or wool was the medieval equivalent of a toothbrush. The method was simple. You would take the cloth and rub your teeth and gums with it. You could use it dry, or you could dip it in water or wine. This rubbing action was surprisingly effective at removing food particles and the soft film of plaque. And it was a physical, abrasive cleaning. People would do this regularly, often in the morning. It was part of their grooming routine, like washing their face and combing their hair. To make the cleaning more effective, they used powders. Think of it as a medieval tooth powder. These weren't just for the rich. Common folk had their own versions. One of the simplest and most common was salt. Rubbing salt on your teeth with a cloth was a good way to scrub them clean. Wood ash from the fire was also used. It's abrasive and alkaline, so it would have had a whitening effect. Crushed charcoal was another popular choice for the same reason. It sounds strange to us to put ash or charcoal in our mouths, but they were effective scouring agents. For those with more resources, the powders could get fancier. They might use powdered chalk, crushed bone, or even the ground-up shells of oysters or eggs. These all serve the same purpose, to provide a gentle abrasive to polish the teeth. They also mixed in herbs for flavor and medicinal effect. Powdered sage was a very popular ingredient. It was believed to whiten teeth and strengthen gums. Mint, cloves, and rosemary were also used to freshen the breath and leave a pleasant taste in the mouth. These ingredients were dried and pounded into a fine powder, then stored in a small box or pot. Beyond the cloth and powder, there was another tool, the chew stick. This was a small twig from a specific type of tree, like hazel or licorice. You would chew on one end of the twig until the wood fibers frayed and separated, forming a small brush. You could then use this to scrub your teeth. The licorice stick was especially popular because it has a sweet taste and contains natural antimicrobial compounds. The chew stick is an ancient tool, used long before the Middle Ages and still used in some parts of the world today. But cleaning wasn't just about scrubbing. Rinsing was a huge part of medieval oral hygiene. These mouthwashes were used to cleanse the mouth, tighten the gums, and, most importantly, combat bad breath. The simplest mouthwash was just water, but more often they used wine or vinegar. The acidity of wine and vinegar would have helped kill some bacteria and cut through any greasy residue left after a meal. They also created sophisticated herbal rinses. They would boil herbs like mint, parsley, rosemary, and cloves in water or wine. After the mixture cooled, they would strain it and use the liquid as a mouthwash. A famous medieval medical text, the Trotula, recommended a mouthwash for a queen made from wine, betony, and other herbs. These weren't just about making your mouth smell good. They believed these herbs had real medicinal properties that could prevent decay and keep the gums healthy. And if you were out and about and felt your breath wasn't fresh, you had medieval breath mints. Chewing on certain seeds and leaves was a common practice. Parsley was a favorite, and it's still known to combat food odors like garlic. Cloves were another popular choice. They have a strong, pleasant scent and also contain eugenol, a natural anesthetic that can help numb a mild toothache. Cardamom seeds, fennel seeds, and mint leaves were also chewed for a quick breath freshener before an important conversation. It shows a constant awareness of oral hygiene throughout the day, not just as a morning ritual. These simple, natural tools and techniques formed the foundation of medieval dental care. They were practical, accessible, and based on the best knowledge of the time. To really understand why medieval people cleaned their teeth the way they did, you have to understand how they thought about the human body. Their medical knowledge was not based on cells, germs, or viruses. It was based on ancient Greek and Roman ideas, primarily the theory of the four humors. This theory was the bedrock of Western medicine for over 1,000 years. The idea was that the body contained four essential fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each humor was associated with an element: air, water, fire, earth, and a quality: hot, cold, moist, dry. A healthy person had these four humors in perfect balance. Sickness, in any form, was caused by an imbalance. If you had too much of one humor or not enough of another, you would get ill. The goal of any medical treatment was to restore this balance. So how did this apply to teeth? A toothache or gum disease was seen as a local symptom of a larger systemic imbalance. For example, a common belief was that tooth decay was caused by an excess of bad or corrupt phlegm. This phlegm, a cold and moist humor, would supposedly seep down from the brain, collect around the roots of the teeth, and slowly eat them away. This is why many remedies focused on drawing out these bad humors. They might apply hot poultices to the cheek to try and dry up the excess moisture, or use rinses with astringent herbs like sage to tighten the gums and prevent humors from seeping in. But the most fascinating and widespread belief about tooth decay was the theory of the toothworm. For centuries, people across the world believed that cavities were caused by a tiny worm that gnawed its way into the tooth, creating a hole and causing intense pain. This wasn't just a folk belief, it was accepted by learned physicians and written about in medical texts. It seemed logical. When you looked at a decayed tooth, the little hole looked like a burrow. And the throbbing pain felt like something was alive in there, wriggling around. Because they believed in the toothworm, many of their treatments were designed to kill it or drive it out. One of the most common and dramatic treatments involved fumigation. The practitioner would heat a piece of charcoal or a brick in a fire. On the hot surface, they would sprinkle the seeds of a plant called henbane. The patient would then lean over this, often with a funnel directing the smoke into their open mouth. Henbane is a narcotic plant. The smoke would have a powerful anesthetic effect, dulling the pain of the toothache. But something else happened too. When henbane seeds are heated, they pop and release small black, worm-like objects, which are actually the plant's embryos. The patient and the practitioner would see these little black things fall out onto a plate or into a bowl of water and believe they were the toothworms being expelled. The pain went away and they had visual proof that the treatment worked. It was a perfect, self-reinforcing cure. Their understanding of breath was also tied into these larger theories. Bad breath wasn't just a social problem, it was a medical warning sign. It could be a sign of corrupt humors rising from the stomach. It was also connected to the idea of miasma, or bad air. People believed that diseases were carried on foul-smelling vapors that rose from rotting matter, swamps, and sick people. Therefore, a person's own bad breath was a type of personal miasma. It suggested there was some kind of decay or corruption happening inside their body. This made the use of aromatic mouthwashes and breath-freshening herbs not just a matter of cosmetic vanity, but a genuine health practice. They were trying to purify the air leaving their body to protect themselves and others. So, when we look at their practices, we have to see them through this lens. Rubbing teeth with an abrasive powder wasn't just about polishing, it was about scraping away the physical signs of potential corruption. Rinsing with wine wasn't just for a fresh feeling, it was about using a hot and dry substance to counteract the cold, and moist humors thought to cause decay. Trying to fumigate a toothworm seems bizarre to us, but it was a logical response to what they believed was the cause of the problem. They were operating within a consistent and complex medical framework. It was a framework that was wrong, but it was not irrational. Cleaning your teeth with cloth and herbs was one thing, but what happened when you got a raging toothache that a clove couldn't numb? What happened when your face swelled up from an abscess? In a world without antibiotics or modern dentistry, a severe tooth infection could be a life-threatening emergency. When home remedies failed, people had to seek professional help, but there was no single dentist to go to. Instead, there was a range of practitioners with different levels of skill and training. For most common people, the first professional they would see was the barber surgeon. In the Middle Ages, the crafts of barbering and surgery were intertwined. Barbers had sharp tools and a steady hand, so in addition to cutting hair and shaving beards, they were the ones who performed minor surgical procedures. This included bloodletting, lancing boils, setting bones, and, most importantly for our story, pulling teeth. A visit to the barber surgeon for a tooth extraction was not a pleasant experience. There was no effective anesthetic. The best you could hope for was a strong swig of wine or brandy to dull your senses. The patient would sit in a chair, often with their head held firmly by an assistant. The barber surgeon would then go to work. Their primary tool was a fearsome-looking instrument called a dental pelican. It was named this because its curved metal claws resembled a pelican's beak. The idea was to hook one claw under the root of the tooth inside the gum line and use the other end as a lever against the neighboring teeth to pry the problem tooth out. Another tool was the forceps, a basic set of pliers for gripping and pulling. The process was brutal and relied on force. The goal was to get the tooth out in one piece, roots and all. If the crown of the tooth broke off, it was a disaster, leaving the painful infected root behind. A clumsy barber surgeon could easily break the patient's jaw, damage adjacent teeth, or cause a serious hemorrhage. And, of course, the risk of infection from the unsterilized tools was immense. Despite these dangers, it was often the only option to relieve the agony of an infected tooth. The barber surgeon's shop, with its red and white striped pole symbolizing blood and bandages, was a place of both relief and terror. If you couldn't get to a barber surgeon, or if one wasn't available in your village, you might encounter a traveling specialist at the tooth drawer. These were often itinerant showmen who would set up a stall at a market or fair. They were masters of marketing and performance. A tooth drawer would often have a stage, banners with gruesome pictures of teeth, and maybe a collection of extracted teeth to prove their skill. They frequently worked with a team of assistants, including musicians with loud drums and horns. The music wasn't just to attract a crowd, it was to drown out the screams of the patients. The tooth drawer's methods were even cruder than the barber surgeon's. They were about speed and showmanship. They would make a big show of examining the patient, then with a flourish, they'd pull out their pliers and yank the tooth. Their skill was questionable, and they were often more interested in collecting their fee than in proper patient care. But for someone in a remote village suffering from unbearable pain, the arrival of the tooth drawer might seem like a godsend. At the very top of the medical hierarchy were the university-trained physicians. These learned men had read the classical texts of Hippocrates and Galen. They understood the theory of the humors and could provide a sophisticated diagnosis. A wealthy patient might consult a physician about their dental problems. The physician would examine them, perhaps declare that the issue was caused by an excess of cold humors, and prescribe a complex regimen of diet, herbal medicines, and mouthwashes to correct the imbalance. However, these physicians considered surgery to be manual labor and beneath their dignity. They would not perform an extraction themselves. After giving their diagnosis, they would send the patient to a barber surgeon to have the dirty work done. So you had a clear hierarchy. The poor had home remedies, or the services of the market tooth drawer. The middle class, like merchants and craftsmen, would visit the local barber surgeon. The wealthy elite would consult a physician for a diagnosis, and then hire a surgeon to perform the extraction. In all cases, the experience was painful and dangerous. The dread of the pelican and the forceps was a powerful motivator for medieval people to take their daily dental care seriously. They knew what the alternative was. The story of medieval teeth is not complete without looking at who the person was and what they ate. And dental health was not the same for a peasant working in the fields as it was for a lord living in a castle. The biggest dividing line was diet, and surprisingly, the poor often had an advantage. The diet of a medieval peasant was monotonous and coarse. The staple of their diet was bread. But this wasn't the soft white bread we know. It was dark, heavy bread made from rye or barley, often containing the whole grain. Crucially, the stone grinding process for making flour often left tiny particles of grit and sand in the bread. This coarse, gritty bread acted like a scouring agent. Every meal involved chewing something abrasive that helped to scrub the surfaces of the teeth clean, preventing the buildup of plaque that leads to cavities. The rest of their diet consisted of whatever they could grow in their small garden, like cabbages, onions, and peas, maybe some cheese, and very little meat. The most important factor in the peasant's diet was the near total absence of sugar. Refined sugar was an incredibly expensive imported luxury. A peasant might go their entire life without ever tasting it. Their sources of sweetness were limited to fruits in season and a little bit of honey. This low-sugar diet meant that the bacteria that caused cavities had very little to feed on. So, while a peasant's teeth might be heavily worn down from years of chewing gritty bread, and they might even be worn flat to the gum line in old age, they often had far fewer cavities than we might expect. Archaeological evidence from peasant cemeteries confirms this. We see a lot of wear, but a relatively low rate of caries, or cavities. Now, let's look at the nobility. The diet of the wealthy was a world apart. They prized fine, white bread made from sifted wheat flour. It was soft and not at all abrasive. They ate a huge amount of meat and fish, often cooked in rich sauces. And, most importantly, they had access to sugar. Sugar arrived in Europe from the Middle East during the Crusades and was treated like a precious spice, as valuable as pepper or saffron. It was a status symbol. The rich used it extravagantly to show off their wealth. They put it in their sauces for meat, they glazed vegetables with it, and they created elaborate sugar sculptures called subtleties for their feast tables. They also consumed a lot of fruit, both fresh and dried, and drank a lot of wine, which is acidic. This combination of soft foods, acidic wine, and above all sugar was a disaster for their teeth. Without the abrasive scrubbing from coarse bread, plaque could build up easily, and the constant presence of sugar provided the perfect fuel for cavity-causing bacteria. It's a great irony of the period that the richer you were, the more likely you were to suffer from severe tooth decay. Queen Elizabeth I of England, who lived at the very end of this period, is a famous example. She had a legendary sweet tooth, and foreign ambassadors noted that her teeth were black and rotten from her sugar consumption. She was often in terrible pain from toothaches. Skeletons from wealthy medieval graves tell the same story: less wear on the teeth than peasants, but a much higher incidence of cavities and abscesses. Of course, the wealthy also had better access to the most advanced dental care of the time. They could afford the fancy tooth powders with ground spices and coral. They could consult with university-trained physicians. They had servants to prepare herbal mouthwashes, but none of these remedies could stop the chemical process of decay caused by a high-sugar diet. A noble lady might scrub her teeth with a sage and clove powder every morning, but if she then spent the day nibbling on candied fruits and sipping sweetened wine, the decay would still happen. So, in the end, the common image of the medieval person with a rotten smile is both a myth and a reality. It's a myth in that people of all classes cared about their teeth and had daily routines to keep them clean and their breath fresh. They were not ignorant or neglectful. But it's a reality in that their tools were limited, their understanding of disease was flawed, and for the wealthy, their own diet created dental problems that their hygiene practices simply couldn't overcome. The peasant with his worn down, but cavity-free teeth, and the queen with her blackened, aching stumps represent the two sides of the medieval dental story. It shows us that when it comes to teeth, what you eat can be just as important, if not more so, than how you clean them.